How to lose 10 kg weight through chess, shown by Karpov. To do that, you must play against Kasparov in a marathon 48 game series, which should end any controversial style. I'll talk about this in a later video. And you should win it 5-3. Yep, this happened in the 31st World Championship match between Kasparov and Karpov. Karpov was the reigning world champ and Kasparov was the challenger. And in the end, Karpov won it 5-3. So let's start. This was the sixth game. Karpov was black, Kasparov was white, and Karpov played beautifully the end game and won it. Let's see how. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, b6, g3, and bishop a6. This is the Queen's Indian defense transposed from the Nimzo Indian defense, and this is not the King's Indian defense. Bishop a6, b3, bishop b4 check, bishop g2, and bishop e7. This standard maneuver, bringing the bishop back, does seem odd, but it also seems that the bishop on d2 is very badly placed as well. And though it may seem black lost a tempo, white also loses a tempo when bringing this bishop to a better square. Bishop g2, and now Karpov plays an interesting move, diverting from theory for a little bit. Castle, not played very often. Mostly games have gone c6, bishop c3, d5, knight e5, knight fd7, wanting to trade the good knight, knight d7, knight takes d7, knight d2, castle, and castle. And the game continues in normal fashion. Yet Karpov straight away played castle, but it did transpose in the end to the sideline which I was showing you after d5, knight to e5, c6, bishop c3, knight of d7, knight takes d7, knight takes d7, knight d2. And you see, same position. Rook c8, getting the rook to an open file because this is gonna open soon. e4, just going against the center. b5, and rook to e1. d takes e4, b takes c4, knight to b6. The knight is good place here. And here Kasparov missed his first chance. Here you need to find what Kasparov should have played. White to play. Pause the video if you need to. I'll flip the board as well for your convenience. Here Kasparov should have played c5, where he missed his first chance to win the game. Here counter-attack like b4 wouldn't work because simply bishop b2. Note, taking on b4 would not be good because of queen takes d4 where the bishop is also attacked. Bishop b2 defending d4, knight to c4, and now knight takes c4. Bishop takes c4, a3. b takes a3, rook takes a3. And the pawn on a7 is very weak and white can easily build pressure towards it like queen a1, queen a2, rook a1. And white will also get a pass pawn in the center. And this will be happy news for white, as like next move d5 is coming. If black plays some move like a6, maybe even e5 attacking c6 and a6. Both these pawns are very weak and black has 3 pawn islands compared to white's which has only 1. But here Kasparov played c takes b5, c takes b5, rook c1, bishop to a3, rook c2, knight to a4, attacking c3, bishop goes to a1. Though it may seem a passive square for the bishop, this bishop is doing actually quite a lot, aiming at g7. And once d5 is played, queen g4 and it's deadly mate on g7 already. Rook takes c2, queen takes c2, queen a5, and again queen d1. What's the point? Well, queen d1, we need to get the queen to a better square. Like, even though queen on c2 is on the open file, next move rook c8 is coming with a tempo, and then rook c1. So a random move like h4 wouldn't work, rook c8. Queen d1 is not possible now because rook c1 is there. So queen d3, And after all of that, black can easily get a good position after b4. Queen is attacked, queen has to move again, and then queen b6, attack d4, b3 is coming next, knight c3, bishop b2, everything is coming, and black has clearly the advantage. So therefore, queen d1, a nice move from Gary. Rook c8, rook c1 is threatened, so knight to b3. Queen b4, d5. And now a passed pawn is coming. e5, e5, and knight to c3. Two back-to-back blunders may have costed Karpov the game, yet he was lucky and saved. Here e5 is a bad move. A move better would have been knight c3, quickly attacking the queen, bishop takes, rook takes c3, and though white may get a passed pawn, d6, well, it can be taken. d takes e6 is not possible because d takes e6, queen d8 check is nothing, as king f7 is possible, maybe even queen f8, you trade the queens, and this will be clearly better for black, as even though there is no material advantage, the king is best placed to come in the center quickly. Black's pieces are doing awfully lot, and rook c2 is coming next, attacking a2. The bishop on a3 is restricting some movement, and overall, it's a good position for black. The e takes d5 was played, giving away that slight edge with black, what black had. E d5 and knight c3, an even bigger blunder. And here, again, it's your move, white to play. Gary had the second chance and he let it go. White to play. How should he continue? Pause the video if you need to. Here, Gary played queen d4, exchanging the queens. It seems kind of obvious that, okay, white has a passed pawn, yet not the best choice. Queen h5 would have been the better move. We shouldn't really exchange the queens, and white clearly has a winning position after knight 6a2, queen e5, threatening queen takes g7. We knew that the bishop on a1 would do something. Queen f8, and now bishop to e4. All pieces aiming at the king. King h8, never mind, queen h5, threaten queen takes h7. Queen g8, okay, knight d4. Bishop b4, knight f5. All pieces into the attack and black is simply helpless. Queen d4 was played, which was not the best move, and black rightfully traded the queens. And here Kasparov is down a pawn after knight takes a2. But his pieces are more active and centralized. He has a strong passed pawn, while just look at black's pieces on the a file after knight takes a2. Not doing anything right now. But you must decide between two tempting squares for the knight, f5 or c6. Where should it go? Where does it look the best? Pause the video if you need to. Here, Gary's third and final chance was gone. He played the worst move, knight c6. Though it looks good, Karpov is easy to diffuse the pressure. As okay, a7 is attacked. Never mind, rook a8 is possible or bishop c5. Bishop c5 clearly being the more active one, attacking f2 as well. By the way, why knight f5 works is because next move knight e7 is coming. If something like bishop f8, it's defending the g7 pawn, d6, threatening d7 followed by rook e8 next. Rook d8 has to be played, knight e7, king h8, knight c6, rook takes g6 and rook e8. Rook check, h5, rook takes f7, rook takes a1, and rook takes a7. And black is in a very weird and awkward kind of pin on the a file. And he will lose the b5 pawn for sure. And white's active pieces and also the distinct knight on a2, which can never come back into the game, will give white good chances for winning the game. But Gary played knight to c6, and his third and final chance was gone. Bishop c5, and after this moment, Black was pristine in his endgame skills. Simply brilliant he played. Bishop h3, rook to a8. Only move, even though this may seem passive, yet the rook cannot go anywhere for the time being. It can go on f8, but rook on f8 not really doing anything. And the rook on a8 just defends the a7 pawn, just in case this bishop on c5 has to move. So bishop d4, bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, king to f8. No back rank mates for white. d6, knight to c3, knight to c6, bishop to b7, bishop g2, rook e8, knight to e5, f6, d7, rook d8, bishop takes b7, f takes e5, and bishop c6. So white does have his d7 pass pawn supported by the bishop, and he's also threatening rook takes e5, followed by rook e8 check, and this would be deadly. And now Karpov decides to take it into a rook and pawn endgame, with Black having a distinct a pawn. King e7, and a nice tactic, bishop takes b5. Note that rook takes e5 is just not good at all, because simply king d6, where after rook e8, king c7, and now the b pawn's just running down the board, and followed by the a pawn. And there is nothing white can do to stop it. So bishop takes b5. Knight takes b5 is forced. Rook takes e5. King takes b5. Rook takes b5. And king c6. And now we have an interesting rook and pawn endgame. The white rook is going to end up poorly placed in front of the pawn rather than behind it, where the black rook will take its place. And meanwhile, the black king is very active. Yet, is this winning or not? Let's find out. Rook h5, attacking h7, h6. Rook to e5, threatening rook e7. Never mind, rook a8. Threat simply a5. Something like rook e7 is too slow. a5, rook takes g7, never mind, a4. Rook e7, a3. Rook e1, a2. Rook a1, and well, you can see this white rook is badly placed. And next move, simply king b5, king b4, king b3, king b2, and this rook is gone. Game over. Rook to a5, king b6, rook a2, a5, king f1, a4, king e2, king c5, king d2, a3, king c1. And white is trying to achieve a typical defensive method. Put the king on a1, put the rook on e2, and then defend everything on the second file. But this also has a downfall of it, that the white king is not able to attend the kingside pawns, and black will try to attack them slowly. If something like king c3 was tried, which was the best option, I would say, trying to go for the a pawn directly, g5, f4. You cannot allow g4 to come, as that would mean these pawns cannot move at all. And this h2 pawn will be undefended fully. f4 and g takes f4. Something like king b3 here can be met by king d4, and white cannot capture the a pawn actually, because his king will be too far. Something like rook takes a3, king takes king e4, king f3, king takes f2, game over. And the white king cannot get close to the h6 pawn in time. So f4 could be played, but after g takes f4, king d5, king d3, rook a4. Black is still better, but he can always just give away this f4 pawn, king c3. Something like king e4, king b3, rook a8, and just stay. He just needs to stay here, and I don't think black can do that much progress. Yet king c1 was tried, and king d4 came. f4, king to e4, king b1, And white has created the defensive setup, like I said. King on a1, rook on a2, defend everything on the second rank. And if the black rook tries to get away, then the a3 pawn will be captured. So black tries a very nice idea. Rook b8 check, king a1, and rook to b2. Taking the fact that rook takes b2 is not possible as the pawn endgame will be lost. After something like king c3, king d4, king takes, this is just too slow, and h5, h4, h3, h2, h1, queen. So white has to accept the challenge, rook takes a3, and rook takes h2. King b1, the king has to rush back to the king side to defend his pawns, and that was the downfall of the king being on the queen side. Rook d2, simply cutting the white king off. You cannot come this way. Rook to a6, and simply king to f5. Idea is to simply go to g4, but not exactly right now. g5 first. Rook a7, and now g5. Rook a6, and this is a very important position in this game. How should black continue? Should he trade the pawns? Should he attack one of the pawns? Should he try to push one of the pawns? How should he do it? Black to play, pause the video if you need to, and try to find the best move, which would win. Here, there's only one move which wins, which is g4. Black must keep the g pawn. And not the natural g takes f4, because after g takes f4, h5, rook a5 check, king g4, rook g5, king h4, king c1, something like rook f2, king d1, rook takes f4, rook g8, and rook to g7. You stay on this g file, and this king will never be able to come out. And the only way is to bring the rook to g1. But something like this, the king will be free. King f2. And rook here is not possible, rook h8. And again, this black king cannot come out, this time because of the black rook. Something like here, never mind, rook f8. No checks on f6. And there is nothing after g takes f4. So we shouldn't keep this h pawn, but we should keep this g pawn because the g pawn has more prospects for promoting. So g4, sacrificing the h6 pawn but gaining the crucial g pawn. Rook takes h6, rook g2, rook h5. So white is hoping for counterplay by this f pawn, which will try to run down the board. But this white king is not able to support the white pawn in time. Here something like king c1 is not possible. Rook takes g3, king d2, rook h3, rook a6, king takes f4. And this is of course winning for black. As g3, g2, g1 queen coming next. Rook h5, king e4, f5, rook to f2. Here rook takes g3 is of course also possible. Rook g5, king f4, rook g7, rook f3, and this would be roughly the same as what happened in the game. But black decided to take the pawn with his king. So king c1, king f3, king d1, king takes g3, king e1, king g2. And without the f-pawn, the game is going towards the Lucena position where black will build a barrier and try to get his king out. And the f-pawn here doesn't do anything and it doesn't help in white's defense. Rook g5, g3, rook h5, rook f4, king e2, rook e4, king d3, king f3, rook h1, g2, rook h3, king g4. Of course, king takes e4 is not possible. The white rook will be gone. Rook h8, rook f4, king e2, rook takes f5. And now black will try to hide from the checks. Rook g8 check, king h3, rook g7, rook h2, king h2, rook h7, king g1, rook h8. White's only hope is to keep the king out and shut in and wait. But that's also not winning. After rook e5 check, king d2, king f2, and the Lucena position is here. It is basically, if you don't know what the Lucena position is, it is basically this endgame technique to build a barrier for this g pawn to go forward. As right now, rook f8, king g3, rook f8 again, king g4, rook g8, and now the black rook comes into g5 and this promotes the pawn as white cannot stop anything. If any other placement of the rook, let's say on e6, would not work because this king would not be able to come out quickly enough, because whenever it comes to g5, a rook check on g8 would win the g2 pawn. It is also important to play rook e5 check, as this black king has to come out as well. So once the white king goes away, boom. Here, if king d3, then of course there's still king f2. Something like king d4 is not possible. g1 queen, king takes e5. This will be winning for black. Queen versus rook endgame. And any other hope like king f3 is not possible because of king f1. And the white king is the barrier for the black king on f1, as there is no rook f8 check. And in this position, Karpov resigned, knowing this Lucena position. So that was that. In the end, black won after many blunders from both sides. In the end, Gary faltered and Karpov got the win. This was the 6th game of the World Championship in which black won and he gained a 2-0 lead. In fact, after 9 rounds, black had 4-0 lead, and yet after 20 or 36 games, the game was decided. The match was decided. Thank you for watching. Bye.